Ever wonder how many ways there are to create Python programs and execute them in macOS, Windows, and Linux? Stick around, I'll show you. Let's say that you wake up and you say, I want to learn Python, but I just am not interested in installing it on my machine. Well, that's fine. This might happen, I think, mostly to Windows users because in Mac OS and Linux, Python version 2 is an integral part of the operating system. And a lot of services rely on it. So if you uninstalled Python 2, your stuff would stop working, as far as I know. So Windows users do not have a default installation of Python when they load up their Windows OS because Windows doesn't rely on Python. So the answer to that dilemma is if you just don't want to install Python on your machine, you can use an online IDE. So you just crank up a browser. In this case, I've got Chrome running, and hit one of the many different ones. I'm not even going to have the time to go over all of them. But one popular one is REPL.IT, REPL.IT, and you sign up for a free account. It lets you type in the code. It lets you organize your code by folders or files. Okay, and then you have a run. When you type your code in, you hit run, and then you can see the results of running your code in the right-hand panel. The beautiful thing about this on these online IDEs is they run in Mac OS, they run in Windows, and they run in Linux. So all you need is a browser, right? It doesn't matter what OS you're running. As long as you have a browser, you can hook up to these online IDEs. The nice thing about that is your code's online in one place. You can share your code with other folks if the IDE that you're using allows that, and REPL.IT does, right? So I'm not associated with these guys, but they seem to have a pretty nice product. There's limitations to having everything in this. You're limited to the fact that the current version of Python running on this machine is 3.6.1. That's not a big deal, but if you wanted the latest and greatest, it's not available yet. So that is the online option, right? So if you didn't want to install Python, you can certainly use an online IDE. The next category would be running it from the Python interpreter. So for you Mac OS and Linux folks, there's already, let me get out of this particular window here. There's already a version of Python installed. Baseline version would be 2. I think in Linux it comes with 2 and 3. Okay, you can install the latest and greatest version of Python, versions 2 and 3. All right, so if you have a version of Python installed, or if you're using Mac OS and Linux, you just pull up a terminal window, as they call it in Mac OS and Linux, and type Python. Okay. Usually the Python, plain old Python with no number at the end of it, will give you Python 2, whatever the version is that's installed. This is usually the default version. And then you're at the Python interpreter. This is called the Python interpreter, and you can just type Python code, like 2 times 2. Well, let's say 2 times. Let's do a character and see what happens. $. Hit return. All right, so now we got $2. Let's try that one again with 10. 10 times $. Okay, so you're using a Python interpreter to enter your code line at a time. You can use the interpreter to load modules, which will then execute multiple lines of code, whatever's in that module to be executed. But generally speaking, the Python interpreter is a good way to learn Python. If you're following along with a book, a lot of books are written in Python. Show you how to interact with the Python interpreter, right? I guess the alternative to the Python interpreter would be idle. So if you type idle, then it brings up the application called idle, which gives you a command line interpreter, but then it gives you more options. You can debug up here. You'd have to refer to the full version of or to the online documentation for IDLE. Okay. Now the nice thing about this solution is it's available in MacOS, right off the bat, right? You usually don't have to install any more Python unless you want to upgrade to the latest and greatest. Okay. And Linux, right? So in Linux we can type IDLE. Here I have a version running already. Okay, here's a version of 367 IDLE. Okay, so you can just type Python code in here. 2 times 2 equals, shows you 4. I know that font's kind of hard to see there, but if you squint and get up real close to the screen, you can see it. All right, so and of course you have the interpreters, right? So you can just have a console running and type Python. Okay, 2715 is the default installation here for Python. Now, usually in Linux, you have to type in a number, well, even in macOS, right? So Python 3, and then we got Python 367. Now, if I want Python 7, I'll clear the screen and type Python 3.7. And I'll get 371, which is the latest that's installed on this particular virtual machine. All right, so EXIT. Now, on the Windows side, you have to install Python explicitly. Okay, so once you have Python installed, you can pull up a command prompt. Okay, and you can type Python to oh, let me see. Yeah, Python 372, right? It was, the font was so big I couldn't even read everything, take it in. So this case, Python 3.7, the default version is Python 3.7.2. That's installed on this Windows box. Okay. So again, we have the command interpreter, 2 times 2. You can enter in code and exit out of here. You also have, for each version of Python installed, let's go to all programs. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So I have Python, it's down here in this lower area. You see where my cursor is at now. Python 2.7 and Python 3.7. If I type, if I expand either of these, you'll see that there's a version of IDLE, okay, for Python. And it opens up the command line too, right? If you want the Python 2.7 command line, or for 3.7, the same thing. If you install whichever version you install in that directory, you'll have all these apps. Okay, documentation for 3.7, Python 3.7 command line, or that's the application, and then IDLE. So for 3.7. Now I have a version of IDLE running right here. So if I crank on that, it's 3.7.2, and then of course you just type in code and run it. Okay. So you know, you have, but you have to explicitly install Python on your Windows machine. Now, I already showed you IDLE for Mac OS X. Let me just get out of here. So, if you have, you can run Python obviously from the command line, right, to get the command interpreter. Another way to use the terminals is to open up an editor. Now, I prefer, when I'm running on Linux or Mac OS, to use VI, right? So if I do VI hello world.py, I have a Python file called hello world.py, and I can edit it. If I have another terminal that's loaded up, let me change to the directory where this is located. So I'll do a dir here. I got to go to cd dev/dev.python. Okay, and let me do a dir here, and then I'll go to projects, do another dir, and then cd hello world. Now if I do a dir here, I have my Python. So if I just type Python space hello world.py, I can run it. So clear, I'll do that again so you can see it. Up arrow key, okay, Python hello world.py. Now the trick is here is you've got your VI. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, VI, I hate VI. In this case, it's VIM. I have a VIM resource file, vimrc, that has some fancy stuff in there to set the line numbering, right, and give me this nice display so it's not painful to use. But now if I edit this file, so this is the I guess the rhythm of coding in Python, right? So, you know, when you're using macOS and even Linux, I suppose, you can cut and paste, right? So if I just hit return here and then escape :write, I've written that file. Now I just go over here to this terminal window to the right and hit the up arrow key, and it prints out hello Rick twice. So the you really can code at light speed with just like a lightweight editor. Now your editor does not have to be Vim. Okay, let me exit out of here. You can have multiple different kinds of editors. Okay. For example, if you have Atom, which is another great editor, okay, the beautiful thing about Atom is it runs on macOS, and over in Linux we have Atom running as well. Let me pull up Atom here. Okay, so there's Atom running in Linux. I'll move that window around a little bit. We have we can also use Sublime text editor. Let's go back to macOS. I've got Sublime installed on macOS. Sublime's another great popular text editor, okay, for macOS, and I guess it might be available on other platforms. For Windows, now I prefer. Let me shut down this Python idle, okay, and clear that. Okay, now I'll minimize this. I have, just as a text editor, I have Notepad++, and you can program in just about any, you know, language with Notepad++. Again, it's just a text editor, right? It's not. I think there are some ways to compile from it. I don't ever use it that way, so you might have to do some research on that. I just still rely on the command prompt. And in this case, here I have my file, hello world, okay, and then if I do a Python hello world.py, it runs it, okay. So again, using a text editor and a console or a command prompt, a console window in Windows is a great way to like work on programs. And you know, they don't have to be little kiddie scripts. They can be, you know, fairly complex Python programs, because you know, Python program, however big they are, is nothing more than like one main module and then a bunch of different other modules that you're importing. So again, these text editors are available in, you know, Linux version, Windows, okay, and Mac OS. So running, you know, creating, whether you're creating, interacting with Python console like the command interpreter, or using VI or Vim, right, in a lightweight, you know, editor to create your program and then run it from the command line, or using a more full-featured. The nice thing about these text editors, they're a lot more full-featured, right? And they have all the cut and paste and syntax highlighting that you would expect from a full-featured editor. And they all have modules that you can plug in to make your coding life easier. Don't have time in this video to go through all those different things. You don't have to have all these different, you know, text editors on your machines. You just have to pick one and get to know how to use it, right? And usually one's fine, right? I just have these for demonstration purposes, okay? But my preference with regards to text editors, especially in Mac and the Linux environment, is VI. In this case, it's VIM, right? Here I didn't put in a file name, so it came up with the intro banner, all right? So to get out of there. Now, like I said, the challenge with VI and VIM, right, is you have to the commands are kind of Spartan, right? You have to get in there and really, it's everything is by the keyboard. It's, you know, escape, colon, blah, blah, this and that, right? There's a lot of shortcut commands, but you got to memorize those things. There's little help books that are just written to help you with VIM. All right. Another alternative lightweight editor built into Linux and macOS is Nano. Nano is a little bit more forgiving. So here we have, you know, a screenshot of Nano in progress. It has some of the commands at the bottom here that you can use. So if I wanted to exit, right, it's Control Exit. So if I do a Control capital X, right, Control Shift X, and that gets me out of Nano. So it gives you some online prompts as to what commands you could use. All right, so that pretty much wraps up like using the interpreter, idle, text editors, and command line. So hang on and I'll give you a tour of different IDEs that are available for all these different environments. Now, building big projects and working on team environment in a team environment poses certain challenges. Usually, the solution is to use an integrated development environment. All right, IDE is the acronym standing for Integrated Development Environment. Usually, these products come with integrated debugging. So there's a couple available free of charge. Right, really, really powerful. And I'll start with Pycharm. Okay, so let me pull up Pycharm. I have a professional subscription to Pycharm because I like this product so much. It allows you to, obviously, these products will let you execute the code right in the application. Here I clicked on the Go button, and the result of this little piece of code is 2, which you can see down here. I know that the font is kind of small. The other IDE that's very popular now, okay, so Pycharm runs on Windows and Linux and macOS, right? So if you get Pycharm, let's say that you subscribe. You don't have to subscribe. The community edition or the free edition is quite powerful, right? You can. There's people where I work at that use the free edition, and that's all they use, and they do quite well with that, right? If I close down Notepad++ and shut down my other console over here, I pull up Pycharm. So Pycharm's running here in Windows. And Pycharm, let me shut down Atom, or let me minimize it. Okay. Pycharm is running here in Linux as well. All right, so you have one tool that you can get familiar with and use it in 3 different environments. Now, are you going to need to use it in 3 different environments? Chances are no, right? I mean, if you're a Windows, if you're new to programming and all you've ever did was pull up Windows and use the command, you know, the mouse to click on folders and stuff like that, you're probably just going to be completely consumed in your first year of taking Python courses with just figuring your way around the computer and learning your integrated development environment. So I would say that you're not going to be using it in multiple different OSs unless you happen to be working on unless you have Linux installed on your machine and you're running Windows in a virtual machine. Okay, but generally speaking, it's nice to be able to learn one IDE and then use that IDE in different environments as your knowledge of computer programming grows and you find yourself needing to use Linux, let's say, or Mac OS. Okay, so obviously we have Pycharm running in Windows here and Mac OS over here. All right, now Pycharm is one integrated development environment that you can use. The other one is Visual Studio Code. All right, so let me crank up Visual Studio Code. What I like about Visual Studio Code, and all these IDEs provide this feature, but I'll show you here. If it tells me it when it powers up, it'll say, hey, you know what version of Python are you using? And I can then select when I crank up, right? Oh, I want to use 372 64-bit. So it'll initialize or make sure that I'm using that. And you can see down here in the left-hand corner of Visual Studio Code that I'm using that. Visual Studio Code is a nice, clean user interface. It's not quite as complicated to use as Pycharm. Not that Pycharm's complicated, but there's a little bit more features in Pycharm that I find. All right, let me minimize Pycharm here. And we also have Visual Studio Code. Now, it makes sense to run Visual Studio Code or even Visual Studio. Visual Studio lets you just create Python projects, right? You can download the community edition of Visual Studio, and it's quite powerful. Okay, again, you don't even need the professional, Visual Studio Pro, unless you. The only thing that it doesn't provide is integration that I know of to the GitHub and stuff like that, unless you're able to activate it, and I just don't know. Right, I've always used the professional version of Visual Studio, and Visual Studio is quite powerful. But here's Visual Studio Code running in Windows, and Visual Studio Code. Sorry, this is Pycharm. Let me minimize this. I have Visual Studio Code also running in Linux. So let me just power that up here. Here's Visual Studio Code. So again, with Visual Studio Code, you have the capability. Or you have the ability to utilize the same IDE with the same look and feel across multiple OSs, all right? And which makes learning the how to program in Python on multiple OS, that you don't have to know anything about the different OSs from the Python perspective usually, right? Because the thing about Python is, as long as there's an interpreter deployed on a machine, you can run your Python code there, right? But if you have an IDE and it's all the same on 3 different environments, then when you do need to make the switch to programming from, let's say, Windows environment to a Linux environment, if you use the same IDE, then you're immediately comfortable with the product that you're using to create your Python programs. Okay, here, the way that we execute our code here, right, in a fast way, is the nice thing about this Visual Studio Code is it has the terminal available to you right down here at the bottom of the screen. So the upper half is the code, the lower half. Now if I type Python, and then the name of this is test.py, hit return, then I execute it just like that. So I'm up here coding, I'm down here running it, up here coding, down here running it, up here coding. And the turnaround is really fast. Plus it has project management features, and it creates virtual environments for you. So it's really nice. That's the nice thing about integrated development environments. Okay, let's go back to Windows one more time. If you're just really learning, if you're just really starting out, right, it can be kind of intimidating, even though these environments are kind of fairly easy to learn. It can still be intimidating to use them, right? So there's Thony, which is another small little kind of a development environment that integrates coding or editing, I should say, right, up here in the upper window, and execution down here at the bottom. So it comes bundled with Python 3.7.1, at least this version that I downloaded. So now if I just type Thony test, right, if I just go, I just hit up here, run the current script, right? There's a little button up there, and it should run it, and it goes, hello Rick, right? So it does all that for you. You don't have to type anything at the bottom. Although this isn't, it looks like it's the Python interpreter, right? So if I type 2 times 2, hit return, it equals 4. If I type something up here, right? Let's say I do Control C, hit Control V. So now I have this, it should print twice, right? I hit, if I save it and then run it, it'll say hello Rick, right? So this is a neat little environment for you to get your hands feet wet with Python and learn the basics before you move up to a more capable integrated development environment. And that pretty much wraps it up. You can run Python multiple different ways. You can create programs in multiple different ways, and I really just kind of scratched the surface. But this is a big picture overview of the many different ways that you can create and run Python programs in macOS, Windows, and Linux. And that's all this video was supposed to do, is just give you a brief introduction. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.